Morning slid across the Turner driveway in a thin gold wash, catching the chrome of the Harley and setting it glowing like metal warmed from the inside. The bike stood exactly where Red had rolled it yesterday, front wheel angled toward the street, as if it remembered the way home by itself. A red ribbon, tied at the seat for Ethan, flicked lightly in the breeze. Ethan was already out there, barefoot, hoodie red and a size too big, both hands resting on the tank as though he were afraid the bike would vanish if he let go. His breath fogged faintly in the cool air, but his face held the quiet kind of pride only a child newly reunited with something sacred could feel. Behind him, inside the small house, dishes clinked, a faucet shut off. Then the door creaked open. Melissa stepped out, still holding a kitchen towel, shoulders slumped with the exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept well in months. She froze when she saw the Harley catching the sunlight, almost startled. It was real. For a long moment she didn't move, just stared, just breathed. Still there, she whispered, voice cracked at the edges. Ethan turned to her, eyes bright. He's home. Mom, Melissa nodded, swallowing hard. She didn't come closer, maybe out of respect, maybe because she feared touching the bike might break whatever fragile miracle had brought it back. Then the moment broke. A gray sedan rolled onto the street, quiet and exact, the kind of car that never parked crooked. It eased to a stop at the curb. A door opened with a soft thunk. A man stepped out, pressed suit, thin frame, gray hair meticulously combed, clipboard in hand, shoes polished to a shine that didn't belong on this street. He looked at the address, then at the Harley, then at Melissa. Mrs. Turner, he asked. Melissa straightened, towel still clutched in her hand. Yes, I'm with the city finance office, he said, shifting the clipboard under his arm. I'm here regarding the motorcycle. Ethan's fingers dug tighter into the edge of the seat. Melissa's eyes hardened, not angry, prepared. You're a little late, she said quietly. They brought it home. They. The man looked confused for half a second, then dismissive. Ma'am, according to city records, this vehicle was sold to cover outstanding fees. Any removal outside official channels may be subject to repossession. Legally, the motorcycle may still belong to the city. He spoke like he'd said the same line 100 times. He never looked at Ethan's face, never looked at the ribbon. To him it was paperwork, a line item. Ethan stepped back until the tank touched his spine. He didn't say anything, just pressed the heel of his palm against the metal like he was holding on to a hand. Before Melissa could answer, the sound rolled in. Low, steady, familiar. Motorcycles, multiple. Engines slowing as they turned onto Maple Lane, rumbling like distant thunder shifting closer. Neighbors lifted blind. A dog barked once. The bikes parked along the curb with practiced precision. Red was the first to dismount. Tank. Doc. Ace stepped off behind him, helmets in hand, boots clipping against the pavement. Red didn't stride toward the man. He didn't posture. He simply walked between the finance officer and the Harley, placing himself in the natural middle of things, calm as a fixed star. The officer blinked at the sudden wall of leather and road dust. Is there a problem? He asked. Yes, Red said, voice even. You're standing in front of a bike that's not for sale. The officer stiffened. Sir, this motorcycle was auctioned. Improper release voids transfer. I may be required to reclaim city property. Ethan's shoulders hitched up, his breath caught, his hand slipped over the engraved letters on the tank. Ride with honor, as if touching his father's name could make the man disappear. Red glanced at the boy, then looked back at the officer. You thinking of towing it off this driveway again? He asked. The officer tugged at his tie, the clipboard lifting slightly like a flimsy shield. If procedures weren't followed, I'm obligated. Funny, Red said softly. It feels personal from where he's standing. A quiet shifted over the street. Not threatening, not theatrical, just heavy, like the moment before summer rain. Melissa stepped closer. Sir, she said gently, my husband died serving this town. That motorcycle is the only piece of him my son has left. The officer hesitated. He opened his mouth, but no words formed. Red didn't fill the silence, he let it settle. A breeze moved through the yard, lifting the ribbon on the Harley. It fluttered lightly against Ethan's wrist. The boy didn't look away from the finance officer. Not pleading, not angry, just steady with that heartbreaking clarity only children possess. The officer swallowed. Somewhere inside him, something flickered. He glanced at the ribbon, at Ethan, then at Red, whose expression was calm but immovable. I'll need to review the fee records, he said finally, voice losing its earlier sharpness. If payments were made, there may be no further action required. They were, Red said. In full, the officer nodded once, backing off a half-step. His tone softened, almost involuntarily. Then, I suppose there's nothing more to do here. He didn't turn immediately. He looked again at Ethan, just 1 second, but something in his face shifted, a recognition, a memory. Then he walked back to his sedan, door closing with a muted thud. Ethan finally exhaled. Melissa's shoulders slumped, something inside her unclenched. Red stayed where he was, watching the boy stroke the tank with a tenderness no 8-year-old should have to know. He didn't say, "It's safe now." He didn't say, "I told you so." He simply nodded once, as if to say, "We're here, and we're not going anywhere." Night settled over the edge of town like a heavy coat, thick and motionless. The gas station stood alone in the dark, its fluorescent lights buzzing with a tired pulse. The smell of fuel, warm asphalt, and cheap snack dust hung in the air. Red killed his engine and stepped off the bike, boots thudding softly against the concrete. Tank, duck, and Ace followed, stretching stiff arms, the familiar metallic ticking of cooling engines echoing between them. Tank tore open a bag of jerky with a dry rip. Doc leaned against pump 4, lighting a cigarette. Ace tapped at the radio on his handlebars until static settled into a low hum. It should have been an ordinary pause in an ordinary night. Then came the voice. A small voice, cracked and uneven. "They took my dad's bike." The words were not loud. They were not dramatic, but they carried the weight of something broken. Red felt them land like a blow against his chest. He turned. Near the third pump sat a little boy, knees to his chest, hoodie red and worn thin. His shoelaces were untied. A single bandage clung to one knee. His hair stuck to his face, clumped by dried tears. Beside him leaned a cardboard sign, the marker letters shaky and smudged by water. "Please help me find my dad's bike." Red set his drink down beside the trash can and walked over, slow and steady, lowering himself to one knee. "Hey, kid," he said softly. "What happened?" The boy looked up. His eyes were too big, too sad, and too old for his small face. "They took it," he said. "My dad's motorcycle. They took it away." Red nodded once, inviting the boy to keep going. "It was all I had left of him." The boy whispered. The neon above them flickered. The hum dropped to a tired buzz. Behind Red, the crew fell silent. "What is your name?" Red asked. "Ethan." "I am Red. These guys back there, they are family. Tell me about your dad." Ethan drew a shaky breath. He was a firefighter, Jack Turner. He always came home smelling like smoke and soap. He was brave. He helped people. Tank looked down at the pavement. Doc flicked ash without looking up. "Last year he went on a call, and he never came back," Ethan said, the words almost crumbling on his tongue. "Since then, his Harley stayed in our driveway. I would sit next to it at night. When I touched the tank, I could hear him. I pretended I was not alone. He wiped his face with the sleeve of his hoodie. But this morning a truck came. Mom said we could not keep it anymore. Bills and stuff. They rolled it onto the truck and drove away. His voice thinned to a whisper. She said it is just a thing, but it was him. Red inhaled sharply. A smell rose in his mind without warning. Warm motor oil, old leather, the fading scent of his father's Indian chief, the one bike that had meant everything to him. He remembered the day it was taken, not sold with honor, not passed down, just lost to bills and overdue rent. The world had called it a thing, but it had been his father's voice in the dark, the one place he still felt safe. For a heartbeat, Red saw himself sitting exactly where Ethan sat now, small and scared on a different curb, in a different town. He understood in a way no paperwork or reason could explain. Red's voice dropped, rough at the edges. I get it, kid. Ethan blinked up at him, hope flickering through the grief. Red steadied himself and asked, have you eaten anything today? Ethan shook his head. Come on, Red said. We have jerky and soda. It is not fancy, but it will do. He helped Ethan up. The boy clutched the cardboard sign like a lifeline as Red guided him to the curb beside the Harleys. Red handed him a root beer. Ethan held the cold can between both palms, drawing comfort from it before taking a tiny sip. Did your dad ride often? Red asked. Every weekend, Ethan said softly. He said the road helps you breathe. Red smiled faintly, the words landing deep. Did you ride with your dad? Ethan asked. Red's answer came low, the memory sharp. I used to, a long time ago. Ethan nodded, accepting that without question. Do you think I will ever get it back? He asked. Red watched him closely. This kid, holding on to grief like a storm lantern. He did not want to give false hope, but he also refused to let the world take from Ethan the way it had taken from him. It is not gone forever, Red said. Just misplaced. You really think so? Ethan whispered. Everything worth finding is still out there. Red replied. Behind them, Tank pulled off his bandana and held it out. You are one of us now, he said, at least until we find it. Ethan tied it around his neck. It was crooked. Nobody fixed it. The crew gathered around him in quiet solidarity, offering jerky, offering warmth, offering something Ethan had not felt since the day his father never came home. Belonging. When the engines started again, their rumble washed softly over the boy. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the sound fill him, letting it chase away the dark edges of the day. Red placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. We will see what we can do, he promised. The bikes rolled out into the darkness, their taillights glowing like a line of red fire. Ethan stood on the curb, waving the bandana until the lights faded and the engines were gone. And somewhere behind a chain-link fence, under a stamped impound log waiting for no one, Jack Turner's Harley stood silent and dusty, not lost, just waiting to be found. Morning crept into the clubhouse slow and muted, the kind of light that felt hesitant about entering a place full of leather, dust, and old stories. Red sat at the long wooden table, a mug of coffee cooling untouched in front of him. The ceiling fan hummed overhead, its blades wobbling with each pass. The air tasted of last night's road dust and burnt coffee. He hadn't slept. He didn't try to. Ethan's voice still clung to him like smoke. She said, it is just a thing, but it was him. Red rested his elbows on the table, hands clasped. In his mind, he could still see that cardboard sign, still hear the crack in Ethan's breath, still feel the weight of a memory he'd thought he buried years ago. The sound of his own father's bike being hauled out of their tiny yard because rent was late. The world calling it a thing while it tore something essential out of him. Tank pushed through the clubhouse door, hair sticking up, shirt twisted. He paused when he saw Red already awake. You look worse than me, Tank grumbled, grabbing a mug. "Long night," Red said, thinking about the kid. Red didn't answer. Tank didn't need him to. Doc wandered in next, rubbing sleep from his eyes, followed by Ace flipping a coin between his fingers. One look at Red, and the coin stilled in Ace's hand. They gathered around the table without a word. Instinct, not routine. Red finally spoke. "We are going after it." No one asked what it was. He slid his phone across the table. The screen opened to a list of impound lots around the county. "We start calling." Doc dragged the phone book closer, flipping through pages stained with grease and time. Tank cracked his knuckles. Ace reached for the landline, the coil stretching with a squeak. They split the list. Ace dialed first. "Impound yard." "Yeah. Looking for a black and silver Harley registered to Jack Turner." "No." "All right." Doc tried the next. Tank leaned back, phone wedged between shoulder and ear. "You sure? Nothing with fire department plates." "All right. Thanks." Call after call. Some yards had nothing. Some put them on hold. Some cussed and hung up. Red dialed the last number on his side of the list. His voice stayed steady, but his hands pressed hard into the table. "Morning. I am trying to locate a Harley. Belonged to a firefighter. Jack Turner." A pause. The voice on the line was gravelly. "Bored." "Yeah, we got that one. Came in yesterday morning." Red sat up straighter. "Is it still there?" "Yep. Behind the chain fence. Needs release. Fees paid. Little over 700. Red exhaled, the sound heavy. "Thank you." He hung up. The crew leaned in. "We found it," he said, "but it is locked behind 700 and chain." Tank whistled low. "Kid is not going to have that kind of money. He shouldn't need to," Red replied. He emptied his wallet onto the table. "A few bills. Some coins. 200. Doc added his own. A little over 100. Ace dumped a handful of crumpled cash. Tank dug in his jacket. They pooled what they had, counting in silence. The stack grew, then slowed, then stopped. Reno, who had wandered in halfway through the calls, did the final count. "We are short. About 50. No one looked discouraged. No one suggested waiting. No one said the word impossible. Ace shrugged. "Guess was skip beer night." Tank groaned. "I was looking forward to that." Red gathered the cash into a single envelope, tucking it into his vest. "We will make up the rest, but we are not letting that kid lose his dad twice." Chairs scraped back. Leather jackets came off hooks. Boots hit the floor. The clubhouse came alive with the quiet, coordinated chaos of a team who didn't need to talk to move together. Outside, engines roared to life, one by one, the deep rumble echoing across the lot like a pulse waking up. Red mounted his bike, settling into the seat that had shaped itself to him over the years. The memory of Ethan's small hands wrapped around that cardboard sign flickered again. This was not charity. This was something heavier, something older, something he owed, not to the kid, but to the child he had once been. Tank pulled up beside him. "You ready?" Red nodded. They throttled forward, a line of riders cutting through the morning with purpose. Dust trailing behind them in long sweeping arc. Somewhere ahead, behind chain link and bureaucracy, a black and silver Harley waited. Not forgotten, not lost, just taken by the wrong people. Red tightened his grip on the handlebars. Time to bring it home. The impound yard sat at the edge of the industrial district, a square of chain link and barbed wire baked under the late morning sun. Rows of towed cars lined the cracked asphalt like forgotten bone. A small office made of prefab metal leaned slightly to one side, as if tired of standing. Red cut his engine just beyond the painted yellow line. The rest of the riders rolled in behind him, engines rumbling low, unhurried but unmistakably present. The sound alone made the man in the booth glance up. his coffee cup pausing halfway to his mouth. "Morning," Red called, stepping toward the booth with the envelope tucked into his vest. The clerk looked them over. Leather, patches, the weight of purpose in their stances, and set his coffee down carefully. "Let me guess. You boys here for the Harley?" Red nodded. The clerk slid his chair back, reached for a clipboard. "Name on the file is Jack Turner. Yesterday morning tow. Fees due on retrieval." "We are here to pay," Red said, voice steady. Before the clerk could answer, a second door slammed open on the far side of the building. A man in a city vest, thin, sharp-eyed, irritated by default, strode across the pavement. "I knew it," he muttered. "I knew there'd be trouble." Red turned slowly, hands relaxed at his sides. "You the supervisor?" The man jabbed a thumb at his badge. "Rules officer. And that motorcycle is city property until fees are verified and processed. No exceptions." Red felt the riders shift behind him, a small ripple of presence. He didn't have to turn to know Tank had squared his shoulders, or that Ace had stopped fiddling with his gloves. "We are paying today," Red said. The officer folded his arms. "And how do I know that money isn't coercively obtained?" Tank barked a laugh. "Does it matter? We are not asking you for a house. Just the bike that never should have been taken." The officer flinched at the tone. "Watch yourself." Red lifted a hand, not to threaten, but to quiet the rising edge from his crew. He stepped closer, not invading space, just filling it. "You took a man's last connection to his father," Red said. "We are returning that connection, that is all." The officer snorted. "You people love dramatic speeches." Red did not blink. "Only when someone needs reminding that paperwork does not make you right." A long pause stretched between them. The clerk cleared his throat. "Sir, the fees are paid if they cover the listed amount. Doesn't matter who brings the envelope." The officer shot him a glare, but the clerk didn't look away. Red pulled the envelope from his vest and set it on the counter. "Count it." The clerk opened it and thumbed through the bills. It wasn't perfect. Crumpled notes, worn edges, but it added up. He nodded. "Paid." The officer sighed sharply, like someone losing an argument with gravity. "Fine. You want your little charity project? Take it and go." Charity. Red's spine stiffened at the word. He didn't respond. He simply said, "Open the gate." The clerk pressed a button, and the metal gate groaned, sliding along its rails until the yard lay open before them. Inside, the riders walked in silence. Red moved between rows of SUVs, sedan, and rusted junk, scanning the corners until he saw it. A black and silver Harley parked near the back fence, dust layering the chrome. The tank dulled but still holding shape and dignity. Even standing still, it looked like a heartbeat frozen in metal. Red approached slowly, like greeting an old friend. He placed his palm on the tank. Under the dust, the engraved words sat just as the boy had described. "Ride with honor." Behind him, the others fell quiet. Tank exhaled softly. "Man, that is a beautiful machine." Doc ran a thumb across the handlebar. "Poor thing's been sitting too long." Red didn't answer. He felt something shift inside him, a mix of relief, anger, and an old ache he didn't usually let surface. This bike was not his father's, but the weight in his chest was the same. He swung a leg over, tested the seat. The key had been zip-tied to the handle by the clerk. Red slid it free. He paused. He thought of Ethan's small hands gripping that cardboard sign, of the way the boy whispered that it had been his father. Red turned the key. The engine shuddered, coughing once, then twice, like waking from a long, unwanted sleep. Then it roared to life. Not smooth, not clean, but alive. Ace grinned. "That'll ride." Tank slapped the fender. "We bringing this home in style." Red let the engine settle to a hum before guiding the bike out of the yard. The clerk watched from the office window. The rules officer hovered near the gate, jaw tight, but he didn't say a word as the riders filed out. Red rolled the Harley to the front of the line. It was lighter than his own, but solid, dependable. A bike built for someone who understood the road. "Ready?" Tank asked, fastening his helmet. Red looked at the horizon, imagining the driveway, the way Ethan would stand barefoot in the morning light. "Yeah," he said, "let's take him back to his son." Engines fired up around him, forming a single wave of sound that cut clean through the morning. They pulled out of the lot together, the lost Harley riding at the head of the pack, no longer forgotten, no longer fenced away behind metal and rules. A father's memory was going home. The return to Maple Lane began with a hush, the kind of quiet that settles over a neighborhood before it understands what is happening. The riders moved slow, engines softened to a respectful murmur as Red guided Jack Turner's restored Harley toward the driveway where it once lived. The bike looked different in the open daylight, metal warmed by the sun, chrome, catching hints of gold. But it was not the shine that mattered, it was the presence. It felt like the bike had found its way back to the place it had been waiting for. Ethan saw them first. The front door creaked open, and the boy stepped out with a school folder pressed to his chest. He blinked once, twice, his breath catching as the convoy stopped in front of the house. The folder slipped from his hands and hit the porch with a dull thud. Then he ran. Bare feet slapped the wood, then the driveway, and Ethan skidded to a stop beside the Harley. His hands flew to the tank, trembling as he traced its curves, like someone afraid it might vanish if he let go. His forehead touched the metal, eyes closed, voice barely above a whisper. "You found it. You brought my dad back." Red felt something tighten in his chest. He climbed off the bike, giving the boy space. "It was waiting for you," he said. Ethan turned, eyes shining through the tears he tried to hold back. Red had seen many kinds of gratitude in his life, but never one this pure or this small. It hit deeper than he expected. Melissa stepped out onto the porch, drying her hands on a towel. When she saw the bike, her breath escaped her in a single sharp sound. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Is that really?" Tank gave a small nod. "Home again." She approached slowly, as if afraid the scene might break apart if she moved too quickly. Her hand hovered above the seat before settling on it with a trembling touch. "I thought it was gone," she said, voice unsteady. Red nodded. "Not anymore." Her eyes glistened. "How did you—" Red shook his head. "Doesn't matter." But Melissa could feel the weight behind his calm, the unspoken miles, the cost, the quiet kind of fight men like him carried without ever telling the story. Ethan's fingers slid over the engraving on the tank. He spoke without looking up. "It still feels like him." Melissa tucked her lips inward to keep them steady. "I know," she whispered. Red stepped aside, letting mother and son lean into the moment. The riders remained near their bikes, quiet and respectful. A living wall, with engines cooling behind them. Ethan lifted his head again. "Thank you," he said. Red dropped to one knee so they were eye level. "You do not need to thank me, kid." But the boy shook his head. "I do. You brought him back." Red swallowed once, throat thickening. Something old stirred inside him, a memory of his own father's bike, the one he lost to rent bills and bad luck. He had been a boy once too, gripping something that carried the last echo of someone gone. He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "I understand more than you think," he said softly. Before Ethan could answer, the low murmur of tires on pavement turned every head. A city-issued sedan rolled slowly toward them, deliberate in its pace, as though the man inside enjoyed the weight of approaching tension. It pulled up along the curb, and the rules officer from the impound yard stepped out. He adjusted his vest and straightened his expression into practiced authority. "Melissa Stefaned," Ethan instinctively moved closer to the bike. Red rose and met the officer halfway. "Afternoon," Red said. The officer did not return the greeting. "I need to verify paperwork. Certain irregularities were brought to my attention." Tank took a step forward. "You have a problem." The officer flicked open a folder, papers snapping in the quiet air. "I might, depends on what I find." Ethan's hand clutched the tank tighter, knuckles whitening. Melissa moved to shield him, but Red gently shifted, placing himself between the boy and the officer without a word. "The fees were paid," Red said steadily. "Your clerk confirmed it. There may be other issues." The officer replied, voice clipped. "And there may not be," Red answered. For a moment, the two men said nothing. A breeze stirred the red ribbon tied to the Harley's handlebar, the soft flutter, a fragile counterpoint to the sharpened tension. Melissa's voice cut through it softly but firmly. "Sir, my husband died serving this town. Please do not make this harder." A crack formed in the officer's stern expression, a flicker of something human, but it vanished quickly. "I will begin with the paperwork," he muttered. He turned toward his car. Red exhaled slowly. Then the officer paused. He glanced over his shoulder and lowered his voice, speaking only loud enough for Red to hear. "You should know," he said quietly, "I am under pressure to retrieve this motorcycle, and pressure tends to roll downhill. Expect follow-up." Red's eyes narrowed. "From who?" But the officer only said, "I am obligated to investigate." Before walking to his vehicle, Red watched the car door shut with a controlled thud. The engine started, but the officer made no move to leave yet. He remained parked at the curb, making notes with unnecessary slowness. Ethan whispered, "Is he going to take it again?" Red kneeled beside him, his voice steady. "No, not while we are here." The riders subtly adjusted their stances, forming a quiet ring around the driveway. No threat, no raised voices, just presence. A line drawn with the kind of clarity that rarely needed enforcement. Whatever force had pushed the officer to return, it was not done. Something larger was turning behind him, gears grinding in places far removed from Maple Lane, but the bike was home. And if the world wanted to take it again, it had a wall to get through first. Ethan rested his hand on the tank, leaning into Red's calm as the engine from the officer's car finally faded down the street. Red stood, Yafset. The homecoming had ended. The real fight had begun. Night settled over the clubhouse with a weight that seemed to press against the walls. The riders gathered around the long wooden table, their faces drawn tight with the kind of silence that only arrives when men know trouble is coming. No one spoke at first. No one needed to. Something had shifted, and the air carried it like static. Red walked in last. He closed the door behind him with a controlled motion. Not loud, not soft, just deliberate. His gloves hung from his hand, forgotten. He looked as though he had ridden through more than wind on his way back. Tank broke the silence first. "Well?" he asked. Red dropped his gloves onto the table and leaned forward, palms braced against the worn wood. "There is someone behind that officer," Red said. "Someone with money and reach." Ace frowned. "A city bureaucrat with a grudge?" Red shook his head. "No, this goes past the city, past rules, past paperwork." The men stilled. Red continued. "There is a man named Marcus Crane, owns most of the towing contracts in the county. He runs the impound like a personal vault. What he takes, he keeps, and he expects everyone to play along." Narrowed eyes flickered around the table. Tank let out a low breath. "So Crane wanted that bike." Red nodded. "He wanted it, and he does not like losing what he thinks belongs to him." Doc leaned forward. "Why target that one? There are easier targets." "That is exactly the point," Red said. "Jack Turner had a clean record. Someone like him should never have shown up on Crane's radar. Unless Crane wanted to make an example or unless he saw a chance to take something he thought would not be missed. A thick silence fell again. Ace muttered, "He picked the wrong kid." Red did not smile, but his gaze hardened. Tank stretched his shoulders. "So what now?" Red took a slow breath. "We are not dealing with a street thug. This man hides behind signatures and fine print. He uses laws like shields and contracts like chains. If we fight him the old way, we lose before we begin." Ace tapped the table. "Then we do not fight him the old way." Red nodded slowly. "Exactly." He stood straighter, eyes sharpening with purpose. "He uses the law," Red said, "so we strike back with the law. We start by finding the first piece of paper he signed to get his hands on that tow yard. Every signature, every forgotten file, every shady stamp. We track it. We pull it apart. We gather evidence until his whole tower cracked." Tank leaned forward. "So we are not going after him. We are going after the foundation he is standing on." Red's voice dropped low. "We take away the ground under his boots." A murmur of agreement rolled across the room. Not fierce, not loud, more like the rumble of an engine turning over before a ride that matters. But Red lifted a hand, steadying them. "This is not revenge," he said. "This is about that boy, about making sure that Bike never disappears again. If Crane has taken from others, we find out. If he used the system to bleed families dry, we expose it. We do not hit him with fists, we hit him with truth." Doc nodded. "Truth can hurt more." Red looked around the table, taking each face in turn. "This is not a short ride. Crane has friends in offices, people who owe him favors. If we push, they will push back." Tank smirked. "Let them." Ace cracked his knuckles. "So where do we start?" Red walked to the map pinned on the far wall. His finger traced a slow path toward the industrial district. "Crane keeps his records at the tow yard's administrative office. Locked room, cameras, night guard who sleeps more than he watches, paper archives they have not bothered to digitize." Tank grinned. "Old school. That means mistakes." Red nodded. "He has been sloppy for years because no one ever challenged him." Ace leaned back in his chair. "Until now." Red turned back to the room. "We ride at first light. Quiet. No noisy. No show. We gather what we can. Receipts. Contracts. Tow logs. Anything that ties him to illegal repossessions," Tank asked. "And if we find something bigger," Red met his gaze, "then we hand it to someone who does not bend for men like Crane." Ace scoffed. "And if no one like that exists," Red's voice darkened, "then we do not ask permission." Another silence filled the room, but this one hummed with purpose. The men dispersed slowly after that. Some went to the garage to check tools and bikes. Others lingered at the table, speaking in low voices about locks, cámaras, and the best angles for avoiding detection. Outside, the wind rattled the metal grate over the door, like the night itself, warning them what lay ahead. Red remained alone after the others stepped away. He wandered into the garage, the bulbs overhead casting pale, uneven light across the floor. His bike sat in the corner, patient, steady. He rested a hand on the tank, feeling the cool metal beneath his palm. In the scent of oil and old leather, a memory rose. His father's bike sitting in a borrowed storage unit, the landlord's footsteps, the stamped paper left behind. The terrible feeling of watching a piece of someone vanish because a man with power decided it could. Red's breath tightened. That same old wound pulsed like an ember inside him. "Not again. Not for another family," he whispered into the stillness, voice low and steady. "We find the proof. We cut him off at the roots." The garage swallowed the words, leaving only the soft hum of night outside. Red shut the lights, stepped into the cool air, and closed the door behind him with the quiet certainty of a man who knows the road is about to change. Dawn would come soon, and Marcus Crane had no idea that a storm was forming in the dark. A storm with engines, a storm with purpose, a storm that carried the weight of a boy's last memory of his father, and Red intended to deliver it. The sky was still more night than morning when Red rolled to a stop, a block away from the tow yard. The air held that thin chill that comes just before sunrise, the kind that seeped through denim and leather and made every sound feel sharper. He cut the engine and listened. Far off, a lone truck groaned along the highway. Closer, a dog barked once and went quiet. The world felt half asleep, eyes closed but still listening. Tank pulled in beside him, followed by Ace and Doc. The rest of the crew waited scattered in the dark along the side street, engines off, bikes angled like quiet sentries. Red swung off his seat. "You remember the layout?" he asked. Tank nodded. "Fence all around. Front gate with a camera. Back corner has that section where the chain link is bent from those drunk kids last summer. We go in there." Doc adjusted the strap on the small bag slung over his shoulder. Inside were gloves, a flashlight wrapped in cloth to dim the beam, and a folded notepad already marked with names and guesses. Ace grinned without much humor. "No alarms on the paper room." "Right." Red shook his head. "Crane trusts locks more than people, and he trusts that no one cares enough to look." He glanced at each of them. "We are not here to play hero. We are here to find proof. Tow logs, contracts, anything that shows his pattern." Tank smirked. "You mean anything that shows he has been robbing people blind?" Red did not argue. They moved together in a loose line toward the side of the yard, staying in the thin strip of shadow between streetlights. The impound lot loomed ahead, a square of chain link and barbed wire. Inside, rows of cars and trucks sat in uneven lines, metal hulks under the pale wash of security lights. Red led them along the perimeter, boots whispering over gravel. At the back corner, the fence bowed inward slightly, where some long-ago collision had bent the metal. The links were patched, but poorly. You had to know what you were looking for to see the small weakness. A section where the ties had been replaced with cheap wire. Tank crouched, fingers working quickly. Metal whispered against metal, and the wire gave way, up and under. He murmured. One by one they slipped through, leather catching briefly on the cold steel before releasing. On the other side, the ground smelled of rust and oil. Their breaths puffed in faint clouds. Red straightened slowly, scanning the yard. Most of the cars still slept under a film of dust. A few had chalk marks on their windshields, dates and codes scrawled in quick strokes. One had a sticker slapped on its side window that read in bold letters, "Abandonned." He felt his jaw clench. "Not our battle," he reminded himself. "Not all of it, not tonight." He pointed to a low building at the center of the lot, light leaking through the blinds like a tired eye. "That is the office," he said softly. "Paper lives in there." Doak's voice came out low. "So do cameras." Red nodded. He had studied the place enough times from the outside to know the angles. "Tank, you go around back. Check for motion sensors. Ace, with me to the door. Doc, you stay by the window. If anyone moves inside, you tap the glass twice." The men nodded in quick agreement. They moved. Red and Ace crossed the open ground with deliberate steps, neither rushing nor dragging. The office door was metal, paint peeling near the bottom where boots had scuffed it over the years. A small camera watched the entrance from the corner of the roofline. Ace glanced up. "You think it is live?" "Yes," Red said, "which is why we are not on it." He stayed close to the wall, beneath the camera's narrow cone of vision. Ace did the same. Tank's voice drifted softly from the back corner a moment later. "No motion sensors, just lazy wiring. Typical." Doc took his spot at the side window. Ease narrowed. gaze flicking between the dim interior and the yard beyond. Red slipped a thin tool from his pocket, the metal cool against his skin. He had not used it in years. But some skills did not rust. The lock resisted at first, then surrendered with a soft click. He pushed the door open just enough to slide inside. The smell hit him first. Stale air, dust, old coffee, and the faint, sour scent of paper that had been kept in the dark too long. A single lamp burned over a cluttered desk, casting long shadows across filing cabinets, lined up like sentries against the walls. Ace eased in behind him, closing the door to a narrow crack. Red spoke barely above a breath. "No touching anything. We do not have to. We document. We copy. We get out." Ace nodded. Red moved toward the cabinets. Each was labeled with a strip of yellowed tape and faded ink. Contracts, release forms, tow logs, complaints. He hovered there for a moment. Complaints. He would come back to that. For now, he pulled open the drawer marked tow logs. The metal glided with a reluctant scrape. Rows of folders stared back at him, each tagged with a month and year. He ran his finger along them, counting quietly under his breath, then stopped at the section that matched the months around Jack Turner's final year. He pulled that batch free and laid them across a nearby table. Ace began scanning page after page. The shuffle of paper, a soft, steady rhythm. Red focused. Tow dates, addresses, license plate numbers, reasons. Some were ordinary do-eyed, expired tags, improper parking, payment default. Then he saw it. Turner, Jack, residential driveway, code, accelerated recovery. Red felt the back of his neck go cold. Accelerated recovery. He flipped back through older logs. The phrase appeared again and again, next to names that did not match typical violations. Widow, hospital patient, deployed officer. Sometimes the notes were cruelly simple. Owner unaware, owner absent, owner deceased. He swallowed, feeling something ugly twist in his gut. This was not a mistake. This was a pattern. Ace paused beside him. "You see it too?" "Right." Red nodded. He pulled his phone from his pocket, checked the time out of habit, and then began taking photos, page after page. The soft click of the camera oddly loud in the stillness. Each shot captured the words, the dates, the codes that showed who had been targeted, and how. Doc tapped softly against the glass. Twice. Red froze. Ace tensed. Footsteps. Heavy. Slow. Moving somewhere outside. Red killed the lamp with a quick flick. The room folded into shadows. The only light now bled in thin lines through the blinds. He slid in behind a filing cabinet, Ace melting into the opposite corner. A key scraped in the outer lock. The door swung inward. A figure stepped inside, flashlight sweeping across the floor. The beam landed briefly on the desk, the chair, the row of cabinets. But it did not climb high enough to expose their faces. The guard, or maybe an employee coming in early. Red held his breath, muscles coiled but still. The man yawned loudly, muttered something about overtime and empty coffee. He shuffled to the desk, set down a thermos with a muffled thunk, and tapped at the computer keyboard, waking the screen. Light washed over his face. Not a guard. The clerk from the gate. Red watched him open a new email, type a few lines, then attach a file. The subject line glowed on the screen. Weekly Accelerated Recovery Report. He felt a surge of anger rise in him, quick and sharp, but he smothered it. Emotion could wait. Evidence could not. The clerk sent the email, closed the file, and stretched until his spine cracked. Then he stood, grabbed his thermos, and walked out again, muttering about needing more sugar. The door closed. A moment passed, then another. Only when the sound of his steps faded did Red move. Ace exhaled. Slow. He nearly sat on me. Red flicked the lamp back on, keeping the shade low. He flipped through the top of the desk pile. There it was again. Accelerated Recovery Report. Names. Timestamps. Internal notes. A list of people whose lives had been yanked sideways by someone with a pen and a tow truck. He snapped photos of each page, fingers steady now that the shape of Crane's game was clear. When he reached the last sheet, something at the bottom caught his eye. A signature. Marcus Crane. Red leaned closer. Below the practice sweep of Crane's name lay another signature, smaller and tighter, his pen biting into the paper. Finance Review. Norris Hale. Red recognized the name. The rules officer. So that was the chain. Crane found the targets. Hale signed the covers. The city looked away. Red took one more photo, holding the page flat so every curl of ink was visible. That, he knew, was not just a record, that was a rope. Outside, the first hint of dawn lightened the sky from black to deep blue. Tank's quiet voice drifted through the cracked window. "Time's up, boss." Red returned the folders to their places, leaving the room as close to untouched as he could. No open drawers, no obvious gaps, only the faint shift of air where truth had been pulled like weeds from a crowded field. He shut the cabinet, turned off the lamp, and opened the door. Cold air rushed in, carrying the muted scent of morning and asphalt. They slipped back through the fence the way they came, sealing the makeshift opening behind them. Only when they reached the relative safety of the side street did Red let himself breathe normally again. Tank studied his face. "Well," Red held up his phone, "we have more than enough to start pulling his world apart," he said. Ace snorted. "Enough to make a few people sweat, at least." Doc looked toward the brightening horizon. "What now?" Red glanced down the road, toward the town that was still waking up, toward the firehouse, where Jack Turner had once parked his Harley with pride, toward a small house on a quiet lane where a boy had finally slept without nightmares. "Now," Red said, "we put this in the hands of someone who still remembers what honor means." He swung a leg over his bike, the seat familiar against him. Engines stirred to life around him, the sound rolling through the empty street like a promise. The sun had not fully risen yet, but the dark had already been cut open, and Marcus Crane, buried deep behind his paper walls, had no idea that the first bricks had just been loosened. The road hummed beneath their wheels as they rode, carrying them toward the next fight. Not with fists, with proof, with names, with the kind of truth that did not need to shout to be heard. Dawn crept in as a thin silver blade across the horizon when Red and the riders pulled their bikes into the shadowed back lot of an abandoned warehouse. The air still carried the chill of night, and the sky held the faint purple bruises of early morning. Engines cooled in soft ticks and pops as the men dismounted. Red's phone glowed faintly in his hand. Rows of photographs filled the screen. Tow logs, signatures, internal notes, patterns of abuse traced in ink and paper. Proof. Tank stepped beside him, crossing his arms. "Tell me we got something worth all that trouble." Red nodded slowly. "We did. Crane has been running a scheme for years. He targets people who cannot fight back." Ace scoffed. "Makes him a coward." Doc shook his head, voice low. "Makes him dangerous." Red tucked the phone away. "This is more than theft. He built a system. The finance officer signs off. The city pretends not to see, and Crane pockets whatever he wants." Tank let out a quiet breath. "So who do we take this to?" Red looked toward the waking town. Smoke rose from chimneys. A dog barked in the distance. The world moved on. Unaware. "We take it to someone who will not look away." He mounted his bike again. The firehouse. They rode through the growing light, the formation tight and purposeful. Their engines rolled like distant thunder through quiet streets. By the time they reached the station, The sun had pushed a warm glow across the red doors. A firefighter hosing down a truck straightened when he recognized them. "You boys hear about Turner?" "In a way," Red said. "We need your captain." Minutes later, the captain guided them into a small meeting room. The lights were dim, dust stirring in soft halos. Red placed his phone on the table between them. The captain braced his hands on the back of a chair. "All right, show me." Red began sliding through the photographs, rows of names, pages, marked with the same coded phrase, "accelerated recovery." Victims who had no reason to be targeted, widows, hospital patients, people caught in their darkest moments. The captain's jaw tightened the further he scrolled. "I knew Crane was a rat, but this—" He shook his head. "This is a pattern, and Hale is signing all of it." Red said nothing. The captain stopped on a page bearing two signatures. Crane's sweeping strokes above Hale's sharp and cramped scrawl. "This is enough to start the right conversation," he murmured, "but not enough to shut him down. Paper is one thing, testimony is another." Ace's voice sharpened. "Who else can we get?" The captain hesitated. Then he nodded once, like someone making up his mind after a long internal debate. "There is a retired investigator," he said. "He used to handle corruption cases. A man who does not bend." Red's eyes narrowed. "Can we trust him?" "With your last breath," the captain replied. He walked away because he would not compromise. The captain lifted the wall phone. "I can call him, but if he takes the meeting—" "You bring everything." Red inclined his head. "We will." The captain dialed, spoke in low tones, then hung up. "He will see you at midday. A diner outside town." Tank gave a low grunt. "Sounds simple." The captain's laugh had no humor in it. "Nothing about this is simple." He leaned closer, voice dropping. "And you should know something." Red waited. "When you rolled into town this morning," the captain said, "you were not alone. Someone followed you." Red stiffened, turning toward the window. Across the street, half hidden behind a maple tree, sat a sedan. Black, glossy, unmarked. Windows dark enough to swallow reflections. He felt the air change around him. "Crane's people," Ace whispered. "Could be," the captain said. "Could be someone higher. Whoever it is, they know the road is shifting under them. They will watch whoever you meet next." Red studied the sedan, his expression unreadable. "Good," he said quietly. "Then we will make sure they see something worth watching." The captain nodded once, grim understanding passing between them. "Be careful who you stand beside," he warned. "Once you draw a line in a fight like this, there is no stepping back." Red picked up his phone. "We are past stepping back." He walked out of the meeting room, the others falling into step behind him. They pushed through the firehouse doors and into the crisp morning air. The black sedan remained parked across the street, unmoving, indifferent, watching. Tank muttered, "If they wanted to hide, they are doing a poor job of it." "No," Red said, "they want us to know." Ace cracked his knuckles. "How about we show them we are not scared?" Red shook his head. "Not today. Today we let them believe they have the upper hand." He mounted his bike, glancing back once more at the sedan. The dark windows reflected nothing of the street, nothing of the sky, nothing human at all. Doc pulled his helmet on. "So what now?" "We ride," Red said. "We do not break stride. We meet the investigator, and we give him the truth." Tank revved his engine, a low rumble that seemed to dare the sedan to react. It did not. Red kicked his own engine to life, the growl of the Harley echoing off the firehouse walls. The others followed, their engines merging into a single rolling growl, a reminder of presence, of purpose, of promise. They swung into the street, passing the sedan without slowing. As they rode by, Red did not look into the windows. He did not need to. Whoever sat inside already knew he saw them. Whoever sat inside knew they were being answered, not avoided. A few blocks later, when the riders turned toward the highway, Tank glanced over his shoulder. They are still there. Red nodded. Let them follow. Let them listen. But they will not understand where we are taking this. Ace grinned. Because they think we are after Crane. Red's voice came out low and steady. We are not after Crane. We are after the truth that keeps him standing. He opened the throttle, sending the group surging forward. As sunlight finally broke free from the horizon, gold washed across the road, their shadows stretching long and lean across the pavement. Doc called through the wind, "You really trust this investigator?" Red answered without looking back. "I trust Jack Turner's captain, and right now, that is enough." They rode on, the town shrinking behind them, the sedan 2 blocks back, steady in its pursuit. Red felt the weight of the evidence against him, the weight of what it meant. He felt the gravity of the day ahead, but he also felt something else, something growing beneath the fear and anger and resolve. Momentum. For the first time, Crane would not be the hunter. For the first time, someone was watching him. And for the first time, Red could see the shape of the path ahead. Sharp, dangerous, but clear. He tightened his grip on the handlebars. The road gives back, he murmured to himself. Always. The diner sat at the edge of the highway like a forgotten postcard. Its neon sign half lit, buzzing faintly in the late morning warmth. A handful of trucks lined the gravel lot, dust settling on their windshields. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee, bacon, and something older, memory, maybe, or resignation. Red parked his bike facing the road, his crew spreading out in a loose semicircle as they dismounted. The black sedan that had followed them since town idled across the street, its tinted windows as opaque as stone. Ace muttered, "They are not even trying to hide. They do not need to," Red said. "They think we are predictable." Tank chuckled. "Then let us disappoint them." Red pushed open the diner door. A small bell jingled overhead, brittle as old glass. Conversations dimmed for a moment. As the riders entered, a waitress with a tired smile pointed toward a booth in the back corner. "He is waiting for you," she said. Red nodded and made his way across the checkered floor. The man in the booth looked up as they approached. He was older, maybe late 60s, with silver hair combed back in a style from another era. His frame was lean, but not frail, a man who had not surrendered to age. His eyes, sharp and unblinking, tracked Red with the focus of someone who had spent decades reading liars. "Nathan Cole?" Red asked. The man nodded. "Sit." His voice was quiet, not weak, just economical. A man who did not waste words because he did not need many. Red slid into the booth. Tank, Ace, and Doc stood nearby, forming a natural shield without making a show of it. Cole folded his hands on the table. "You have something for me?" Red handed him the phone. Cole scrolled through the photographs, his expression unchanged. Tow logs, recovery codes, signatures that tied Crane and Hale together, patterns of exploitation clearer than a confession. Finally, Cole spoke. "This is not sloppy corruption," he said. "This is engineered, repeatable, profitable, and protected." Red's jaw tightened. "We figured as much." Cole looked up. "How far are you willing to go?" Red answered without hesitation. "As far as the truth goes." Cole exhaled through his nose. "Thoughtful. Good. Because Crane does not crumble from outside noise. He crumbles when someone cuts the lines holding him upright." "What lines?" Ace asked, leaning closer. Cole tapped the screen. "Hale is the hinge. If you remove him, Crane loses legitimacy. No signatures. No cover. Crane becomes a man with a tow yard, instead of a man who controls a town." Tank crossed his arms. "So, we expose Hale." Cole shook his head. "No, you protect him." Red frowned. "Explain." Cole leaned in, lowering his voice. "Hale is not malicious. He is terrified. Crane has something on him, something old, something personal, enough to keep him obedient. If you corner Hale the wrong way, he will fold deeper into Crane's grasp. Doc rubbed his chin. So how do we pull him out? We get to him before Crane does. Outside, a car door slammed, sharp enough to draw eyes. The riders tensed. Through the window, Red saw two figures step out of the black sedan. They were dressed in casual clothes, but something in their posture, rigid, alert, screamed enforcement. Tank whispered, "Crane's watchers." Cole did not turn around. "They followed you because Crane is nervous. He knows someone rattled his cage." Red kept his voice low. "Should we move?" Cole flicked his fingers in a small, dismissive gesture. "Not yet." He returned the phone. "What you have is enough for a preliminary case," he said. "But to make it bulletproof, you need one more thing." Red waited. "Direct testimony from Hale," Cole said. "We need him to admit what Crane forced him to sign." Ace whispered a curse. Cole's tone sharpened. "You asked how far you are willing to go. This is it." Red nodded once. "Where is Hale now?" Cole finally turned slightly, just enough to glance through the window. "The black sedan is not here for you," he said. "It is here for him. Hale is scheduled to meet Crane today. That means he is scared." Red's breath stilled. "They are going to pull him in," Cole said quietly, "before he breaks." Tank leaned forward. "So we get to Hale first." Cole nodded. "And you make him understand he has a way out." Red rose. "Where?" Cole pulled a notepad from his coat, tore off a page, and slid it across the table. "A name, a side street, a time. He leaves his office in 20 minutes. Cole said. "Crane's men will follow. If they get to him first, he disappears into the system, and you lose the only man who can bring Crane down from the inside." Red placed the note in his pocket, his movements controlled, but coiled with purpose. Cole's voice softened. "Just barely. Listen carefully. Hale is not your enemy. He is the key to ending this. Treat him like a threat, and you become one more reason he runs. Treat him like a lifeline, and he will take it." Red nodded. Cole added, "And one more thing." Red paused. "When you take Hale under your wing, Crane will realize you are not gathering stones anymore." Cole's eyes darkened, sharp as steel. "You are building a wall." Red did not smile, but something in his chest steadied. He turned toward the others. "We ride." As they headed for the door, Cole called after him. "And Red looked back." Cole said, "Crane will send more than watchers next time." The riders stepped into the sunlight. The men from the sedan stiffened but did not move. Red mounted his Harley. Tank asked, "Straight to Hale?" "Yes," Red said. "Before they do." Ace smirked. "Good morning to them." Engines roared to life, shaking dust from the gravel. Red led the pack, the wind catching his jacket, the world narrowing into the path ahead. Because now the fight had shifted. This was no longer about finding truth. This was about protecting the truth-bearer, and Hale's next breath, his next choice, would decide whether Crane's empire cracked wide open or tightened like a fist. Red opened the throttle. The hunt had begun. The street where Norris Hale worked was lined with small offices and overgrown hedges that had not seen trimming in months. It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing dramatic ever happened. Until today, the late morning sun hovered behind a thin veil of cloud, casting a muted gold over the cracked sidewalk. Red brought the riders to a smooth halt half a block from Hale's building. Their engines dropped to silence one by one, leaving only the faint hum of traffic in the distance. Ace scanned the street. "No sedan yet." "They will come," Red said. "Crane does not let loose threads dangle." Tank nodded toward the far end of the block. There, a black car rolled slowly toward them, its glossy frame reflecting nothing but sky. It moved like a shadow searching for its owner. Red felt the shift in the air. They were running out of time. Doc pointed toward a narrow door beside a law office. That is Hale's exit. Red walked toward it, boots steady on the pavement. He positioned himself beside the alley mouth, hidden from street view. The others fanned out, silent and poised. Seconds stretched. Then the door clicked. Norris Hale stepped out with a thin folder tucked tight under his arm. He looked smaller in person. Thin, yitteru, skin pale as though he had been living under office lights for years. His tea was crooked, his breath short. He locked the door, unaware of the riders watching him. Red stepped forward. Hale. Norris jolted so hard he nearly dropped the folder. His eyes went wide, darting like a trapped animal's. I know who you are, he stammered. You are the biker from the driveway. Red stopped a few feet from him. His voice was calm. We need to talk. Hale swallowed, glancing past Red toward the black sedan creeping down the street. I cannot, he whispered. I should not be seen talking to anyone today. That is exactly why we are here, Red said. Hale took a shaky step back. Please, I have no involvement in any of this. Ace let out a quiet scoff behind him. He is already lying. Red held up a hand, stopping Ace before he could take a step. Hale, Red said evenly, we are not here to hurt you. We are here because someone is coming to make sure you never talk to anyone again. Hale's face drained of color. He clutched the folder tighter. Who told you that? Someone who knows Crane. Red replied. Someone who knows fear when he sees it. Hale's breath quivered. He backed toward the alley wall. You do not understand. If I talk, if I even stand here, Crane will destroy me. Red stepped closer, softening his voice. He is already trying. Hale's eyes flicked to the sedan again. The car slowed, its windows impossible to see through. They are watching me, Hale whispered. They are watching all of us, Red said. Hale's fingers trembled on the folder. He pressed it to his chest like a shield. If I cooperate, Crane will not be the only one angry. The city, the contracts, everything is built on his network, and that is the problem, Red said. You have been trapped in his web. So long you forgot. You can cut your way out. Hale's eyes brimmed with something more than fear, something closer to grief. You think I want this, he said. You think I wanted to sign those papers? I told them the codes were wrong. I told them I did not want to be the one approving them. But they put me in that office, and Crane made sure there was no right answer except his. And you kept signing, Red said gently. Hale looked down, ashamed. Doc stepped forward. Hale, people lost more than cars because of those signatures. Hale blinked hard. I know. Red. Let the silence sink in. The street felt smaller, as if the buildings leaned closer to listen. Then help us stop him, Red said. Hale looked up sharply. How? Give us testimony, Red said. Tell the investigator what Crane forced you to sign, how he cornered you, how he built his operation. Hale's voice cracked. You have no idea what he will do. And you have no idea what he will do when he realizes you do not show up today. Red replied. The black sedan slowed to a crawl. Hale's breath hitched. Panic flickered in his eyes. They are early. Ace stepped beside Red. We can get him out of here. Red nodded once. Hale shook his head, terrified. If I leave with you, Crane will assume I am flipping. He already assumes it, Red said. That is why he sent them. Hale froze. For the first time, he seemed to truly understand just how close Crane's reach had become. Red extended a hand. Not forceful, not demanding, simply steady. You have one chance, Red said. Come with us. Let us protect you. Let us get you to Cole. Let us end this together. Hale stared at the offered hand. The sedan's door cracked open. A tall figure stepped out, adjusting his jacket. Eyes locked on Hale. Hale's pulse visibly jumped. Red's voice dropped to a whisper. Norris. Now, Hale closed his eyes. Then he stepped forward and took Red's hand. Ace exhaled. About time. Red moved quickly. Tank, take the rear. Doc, watch our flank. Ace, keep eyes on the sedan. Hale stumbled as they guided him toward the motorcycles. They will chase. Red helped him onto the back of his Harley. Let them. The sedan engine roared behind them. Red kicked his bike to life, the sound thundering through the narrow street. The others followed in a synchronized surge. Hold on, Red told Hale. Hale gripped the metal bar behind him with trembling hands. The sedan lunged forward. Red twisted the throttle. The crew shot down the road in a tight formation, engines screaming through the quiet block. Hale pressed himself flat against Red's back. Breath ragged. They will not stop. Hale shouted over the wind. They do not have to. Red answered. They just have to lose. The riders split at the intersection. Tank and Doc peeling off to block one path. Ace sweeping behind as interference. Red veered into the main road, forcing the sedan to choose between targets. It chose poorly. Tank and Doc's sudden diversion slammed confusion into the driver's timing, buying Red precious seconds. Red pushed the Harley harder, the engine roaring as they tore across the sun-washed pavement. Hale clung on with a mix of terror and trust. The sedan shrank behind them, boxed in by oncoming traffic and the riders' sharp maneuvers. A few heartbeats later, Red turned onto a side road and slowed just enough to let Hale breathe again. You are safe, Red said. For now, Hale whispered. Red nodded. Long enough to do what matters. Hale swallowed hard. Then take me to Cole. Red touched the throttle lightly. We will. Ahead, the road curved toward a horizon painted with new danger, but also, finally, with a path forward. Nathan Cole's house sat at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by tall pines that shielded it from view. The kind of place where a man could vanish for a while without being forgotten. Red arrived first, Hale still gripping the back bar of the Harley, as though letting go would drop him into a pit. The other riders formed a perimeter around the property, engines humming low before silencing one by one. The air smelled of sap and cold earth. Cole stepped out onto the porch before Red even killed the engine. His eyes flicked between Red, the crew, and the trembling man behind him. So, Cole said quietly, you found your witness. Hale slid off the bike, knees unsteady. He looked smaller out here, as if daylight peeled away whatever bureaucratic armor he once had. I am not a witness, Hale said weakly. I am just trying to stay alive. Cole studied him for a long, unreadable moment. Sometimes those are the same thing. He gestured toward the house. Inside, before someone else finds you. Red led the way. Hale followed, hands clenched tightly together, shoulders hunched like a man expecting a blow. Cole shut the door behind them, sliding 3 locks into place with slow, deliberate clicks. The living room was modest, an old coffee table, stacks of folders, a muted television, and a single lamp casting soft light across the space. Cole motioned for Hale to sit. Harley didn't. He stood rigid, staring at the floor. Cole sighed. You do not have to be afraid of me. Hale shook his head. It is not you I fear. Red stepped forward. Start wherever you can. We will fill in the rest. Hale swallowed hard. Crane took everything from me. Cole raised an eyebrow. Explain. Hale clasped his hands behind his back, trying to steady them. Years ago, Crane helped me through a financial collapse. My wife was sick. Medical bills, debts. It was drowning us. He closed his eyes. Crane offered help, said I could repay him through small favors. Nothing illegal, nothing questionable. His voice cracked. At least that is what he said. Red exchanged a look with Cole. Hale continued. Then he moved me into the impound oversight office. Started telling me which vehicles needed approval, which codes to use, which signatures to push through. He said everything was quiet. No one would ever ask. His breath hitched, but then the targets changed. Cole's voice was calm, almost gentle. Changed how? They were no longer people with violations. Hale whispered. They were people who were vulnerable, families grieving, someone in hospice, a widow who was behind on payments for a single week. He began wringing his hand. Crane wanted their cars, their bikes, anything valuable, said they would not fight. Red felt his jaw tighten. Hale looked up for the first time. Desperation filled his eyes. I tried to refuse. I did. But Crane kept reminding me what I owed, what he could expose. Every time I hesitated, he found another way to corner me. Cole nodded slowly. Blackmail. Hale shut his eyes again. Yes. Red stepped closer. So you kept signing. Hale bowed his head. Every time I picked up that pen, I prayed someone would stop this. Someone stronger. Someone who did not owe Crane anything. And when Jack Turner's bike was taken, Cole asked. Hale's voice trembled. I knew it was wrong. He was respected, a firefighter. But Crane wanted the bike because it was valuable and clean. He said it would be an easy grab. His hands tightened until his knuckles whitened. I almost refused. I should have, but Crane reminded me of my wife, her treatment, the debts I still carried. Red's breath went cold. He used your grief, Red said quietly. Hale nodded, tears forming. He uses everyone's grief. Cole leaned back in his chair, weighing every word. That confession alone is enough to open a case, but to close it, we need proof. He coerced you. We need the threats, the records, anything you kept. Hale hesitated, pain flickering through his eyes. I have something, he whispered, but if Crane realizes I gave it away, he already thinks you flipped. Red said, that sedan did not come to escort you. Hale flinched. I know. Red softened his voice. You did not become the villain here, Norris. Crane did. You just lost your way inside his shadow. Hale sank slowly onto the couch, the weight of years finally collapsing through him. I kept copies, he said at last. Emails, messages, notes he passed through intermediaries. I hid them in case something ever happened. Cole's eyes sharpened. Where? Hale lifted his gaze toward Red, voice barely audible. In my house. Cole's posture stiffened. Is your house watched? There are cameras on the street. Hale whispered. Crane put them there. Red nodded once. Then he knows you have not shown up. He knows you are with us. Hale's breath caught. Then, it is already too late. No, Cole said firmly. Not if we move smart. Red stepped closer to the trembling man. Show us where the copies are, Red said. We will get them. Hale shook his head. Crane's men will be waiting. Red's voice dropped to a deep, steady certainty. Then they will not be expecting how we come. A knock echoed against the front door. 3 slow taps. The riders outside reacted instantly. Boots shifting. Engines rumbling to life in warning. Cole stood quietly, unfazed. They found you sooner than I thought. Hale went pale. Red placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Norris, look at me. Hale lifted his frightened eyes. You are not alone anymore, Red said. Not today. Outside. Gravel crunched as footsteps circled the porch. Tank's voice boomed through the doorway. Boss, we have company. Red's jaw set. The paper wall had broken. Now came the fallout, and Red was ready. In the end, this story reminds us that justice is rarely loud, and courage doesn't always look like a fist raised. It often looks like an ordinary person choosing not to look away. Red, Ethan, and everyone caught in Crane's shadow show us something simple but deeply human. When one voice breaks the silence, others find the strength to step forward too. Grief can bend a person, but it doesn't have to break them. And sometimes the family we find through shared struggle, decency, or sheer stubborn hope can carry us farther than the family we were born into. In real life, injustice doesn't always come with sirens or villains in dark suits. More often, it hides in paperwork, in just following procedure, in people who forgot that power is a responsibility, not a shield. But as the saying goes, character is what you do when no one is watching. Red's journey reminds us that we are all capable of choosing integrity, even when it costs us something. And Ethan's quiet resilience shows that holding on to what matters, memory, love, dignity, is itself an act of resistance. If you're facing something unfair, or walking away from a harmful relationship, or struggling to protect what's worth keeping, remember this truth. You are not powerless. You get to decide what you stand for, and every small stand adds up. The road is long, but, as folks say, the long road shows the true rider. I'd love to hear what part of this story spoke to you. Share your thoughts or your own experiences in the comments. If this moved you, tap like to support the channel and subscribe so you do not miss the next story. Each one full of grit, heart, and something to take with you. Wishing you a quiet evening, a steady heart, and a little more hope than yesterday.